Thanks for meeting with us. Could you introduce yourself and sort of like what sort of thing you do?
My name is Dailey Crafton. I ferment beer with wild yeast in a nutshell. So I collect it from sources like fruits, ambiently from the air, insects, and pieces of wood.
Oh wow! I mean,
Like,
I actually don't really know like almost anything about like the beer fermentation process. I actually even to be completely honest, I actually don't even drink beer that often. But I'm pretty interested in like the science behind it. Could you explain sort of what is kind of entailed in beer fermentation?
sure, I'll start top level, which is alcohol fermentation.
Cool.
Or, well, you're not fermenting alcohol, but fermenting something into an alcoholic
Right,
beverage.
right.
Anything with sugars in it, especially simple sugars, can be fermented with yeast into an alcoholic beverage. So the yeast breaks down the sugar into CO2 and alcohol and other compounds, but the two main compounds are alcohol and CO2. The CO2 during the main fermentation escapes, but once your primary fermentation is done, you can put it in an airtight vessel, and the residual fermentation will create carbonation in the beverage. The CO2 goes into suspension. So the main yeast that ferments sugars into CO2 and alcohol is called Saccharomyces, because it is really good at processing sugar. So
Oh right, sacro. Yeah.
there's another one called Brettanomyces, and there's a handful of other strains of yeast, and there's bacteria like Lactobacillus and
Right.
Pediococcus that also play a role in spontaneous and wild fermentation. They not so much involved in alcohol production or sugar conversion, but souring, adding acid, like sour acids to a beer.
So like the different flavors are sort of introduced by these different bacteria that consume different types of source food, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So like how long does that actually normally take, or does it vary? I mean, I imagine it varies depending on like alcohol, but I guess like which alcohol you're trying to get. But in terms of beer, like what's the kind of average length of time it takes to do that?
Like the most basic fermentation of beer, if you were to buy a commercial yeast to make an ale,
Yeah.
you could do it in like 4 to 6 weeks.
Oh, cool. So that's actually pretty quick turnaround then.
With wild fermentation, it's possible that you could do it in 4 to 6 weeks. Usually, the microbes that you're collecting from the wild are throwing off some pretty shitty flavors, barbecue flavors at first, which the microbes will later go back and process into something tastier.
I see.
But that process takes a lot longer. You can, you're looking at like 6 months to a year.
Oh wow.
While on the long end, it's possible to get like a wild yeast beer in just a few weeks. I've done it, but you have to. There's a couple ways you can do it. You can ferment spontaneously, which is just basically leaving the beer out in the open and like letting whatever's in the air get in there. Which is it produces some interesting stuff.
Is that ever like more like dangerous, or in terms of the actual drinking product?
Yeah, there's a way to, as long as you get, you can measure. There's a way to measure and see how much alcohol is produced, and as long as you get, like 4 or 5% alcohol or more, then that's antiseptic.
Oh right, because it'll kill anything that's bad.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Cool.
So. But if you don't get you have to check it to make sure that alcohol is produced. If it's not produced, then it can be dangerous, and you should dump it out. But if you get a alcohol production,
cool. So I'm going to be getting to the answer in a moment. But I just have one other question before that. So like your name is Dailey Crafton, and like that's almost like too perfect of a name for like a craft brewer. So like I was just wondering, like, is that your birth name? And yeah.
My name is Christopher Dailey Crafton.
Wow, I always just you kind of like took like middle name or whatever, but
yeah, it's one of those names.
But wow, that's really amazing.
knew a chiropractor in college. His last name was actually his name was Dr. Popwell. That
Wow.
was really his name.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking like it would be like if my name was like Anthony Antwerp or something.
Yeah. You could
Well,
always make a stage name.
yeah, that's true. If I ever take my ant research public or something. But yeah. So anyway, so like getting to the ants, yeah. Like I'm kind of curious, like how you kind of started or had the idea to use ants in the fermentation process.
Well, it was an accident.
Really?
But I did it. So the story is that I went out to get a zucchini blossom. It was in September or October of last year. Must have been actually September, and maybe even August. It was like it was towards the end of the growing season. Like summer was coming to a close.
I see. Yeah.
Fall was coming, and
That's also towards the end of the ant season too. But
yeah, yeah. I guess for this probably the same reason. But
yeah,
the blossoms, the blossoms on plants were going to not be around very soon.
I see.
And I wanted to do one more capture from a blossom before yeast capture. Yeast will live on blossoms because there's the sugar in there, and the yeast wants the sugar.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was trying to do one more yeast capture before fall and winter hit, and there wasn't going to be much vegetation to try to capture back up. So I went out to the garden to get zucchini blossom. A lot of the other stuff had stopped flowering already, but the zucchini were still flowering. So I got one, and I was carrying it back to the house, and a bunch of ants came crawling out of it. And I was like, oh. But I wouldn't say researched it, but having read a lot about it and read about what other wild yeast people were doing, and I found, I've heard a couple people mention that bees were a good source of wild yeast because of interaction with flowers and making honey and whatnot.
Also, so they pick up basically the yeast from different flowers. Oh, interesting.
And I thought, well, these ants probably are too, because they're definitely doing something in that zucchini blossom.
Yeah.
So whatever is on them is probably whatever's on that zucchini blossom. There's probably a lot of it in and on the ants as well.
Interesting.
So I just put them in on the starter. The starter is like a mason jar worth of wort. Wort is unfermented beer. It's beer it's like sugar. It's like barley sugary juice. It's gross.
I believe you.
It's too sweet. It's gross. But
I see.
But
I see you know that from experience.
You taste it like at the end of the boil or whenever you're done making the wort to see how it came out.
I see.
But yeah, but you make a little starter, like a mason jar worth of wort, and then you put whatever it is you're trying to harvest yeast from into that starter. So I put the zucchini blossom and the ants alive all into that starter, and let whatever was on them fermented.
Interesting. Because that's kind of interesting because because the ants also have like a decent amount of other chemicals in them too, and so that sort of actually leads me to my next question, which is what did it taste like? The final product.
It was pretty normal. It was a typical tasting beer. It definitely had a farmhouse ale quality to it, which is farmhouse ales tend to have a more complex flavor palette, especially yeast derived. In typical beers, a lot of times brewers aren't looking for a whole lot of quality from a flavor profile from the yeast. A lot of it's being derived from the barley malt and the hops.
I see.
In a farmhouse and in a lot of what would be considered, I guess, Belgian styles, the yeast is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of adding complexity to the
interesting.
So you can get really fruity, and peppery, and spicy flavors. I was just in a competition where the judges asked if I had put spices into the beer, and I was like, no. So
Oh,
I just found
was that for the Ampere or for a different one?
it was a different wild yeast
Oh,
beer.
I see.
The principal remains. So it tasted like that. It was very, very rich in flavor from the yeast.
Cool. Yeah, was there anything that was kind of like unique about it compared to other beers that you've brewed so far, or was it more kind of like subtle than that, I guess?
I guess. I mean, yes. I can't really articulate it.
Well, right, I know explaining flavors can be hard sometimes.
I mean, it was definitely like fruity and peppery, but it was like a different peppery than the other ones that I've made.
Interesting.
But I don't really know how to articulate on that level.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Also, sometimes I always get a little bit confused by some of the terms I use, like in things like wine tasting. So it might not make any sense to me, even if you could describe it. So sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, you said that ants have chemicals in them.
Yeah,
I wonder, like, what the flavor threshold is of those, like, parts per million. Because it was maybe like 20 ants that went.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
it wasn't a whole colony.
Yeah, because it's interesting because generally it's fairly pungent. Well, it depends on the species, but the scientific name for ants is Formicidae, which is based on formic acid, which a lot of ants have formic acid. If not all ants at some level, but actually, the ants that were would be like living inside or near that kind of plant would probably have formic acid in them. And so actually. That's funny. We're talking about this because that also kind of leads you to another question, which is: Are you planning on ever like experimenting with like different species of ants to see if there's a different flavor profile?
That's a good idea. It's not crossed my mind until just this moment.
Yeah, because there's like 13,000 species in the world of ants, but in Boston there's probably maybe 20 or so. Wait, sorry, New York, right? Sorry, yeah, you're in Brooklyn. I was thinking Brooklyn. Yeah, sorry. They all start with B's, but I'm sure someone from Brooklyn would kill me. But for conflating it with Boston. But anyways, in New York, there also actually has been some like studies on the ant communities in New York, and I think there's something like 40 species or something, if not more, in New York City proper. So yeah.
Yeah, these ones they're medium-sized black ants.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, because it really could be a range of species. But yeah. And like, have you only done this once, or because I know that the beer is called Funky Fresh, right?
The funky was from the yeast.
Oh, right, which makes sense.
It was because I grew hops in my garden, so instead of buying processed packaged hops, I use fresh hops straight off the vine.
Oh, cool. Which I imagine is probably is that generally considered like better, I assume, or to do it that way, or.
No, it's just different.
Oh, different, yeah.
With like the dried, like usually typically the hops are grown in a big farm and they're harvested and then they're kiln dried and then they're compressed into little pellets. It looks like rabbit food the way we package the hops.
Yeah.
So you get all the bitterness and aromatics from those hops, but then with the fresh hops, you get more of this, I think, like earthy, grassy, because you still got like all the water is in there, and it's everything that's like straight off the vine is going in. Oh, I see.
So yeah, like it basically has absorbed more of the surrounding flavors or whatever.
It's more juice, I guess. Like,
interesting.
Really, it's still got water content, whereas like the ones that are processed have been killed dry, and a lot of that's been extracted during the drying process.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm. So like I think our readers would be very curious to know if it's possible to buy Funky Fresh anywhere, or to get it, or if you plan on making it again.
It's not, but I can give you the recipe.
So there wouldn't be any way to like pay you or coerce you to brew it again.
I mean, I might. I had to go find some ants.
Well, that shouldn't be too hard, right?
It shouldn't be too hard. That's an interesting idea, though, rather than... Because I'm sure there's a significant colony of yeast on the zucchini blossom itself.
Yeah.
And I can't really say for sure
what right.
It all came from that whole thing. So
Right, so like which parts of the flavor profile, or if any, came from the ants?
yeah, if I were to grab maybe 20 to 30 ants alone and put them into the wort, then I would have a more specific ant
Right.
isolate yeast rather than like ant plus zucchini blossom
Yeah,
together.
like that would be like a true like experiment on ant beer. Yeah.
There's a guy named Derek Dellinger. He's a head brewer at Kent Falls Brewing in Connecticut. He talked about capturing from bees.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I imagine if it works with bees, there's nothing I can think. I mean, I guess bees do a lot more like actual pollination, actually like being on the flowers than the average ant would. But certainly like ants are crawling on everywhere. I would still expect that they would have some, and they do have little hairs on them a lot of times. Not as much as a bee, so it's possible that maybe the concentration is not high enough to affect it too much. But
here's a question.
Yeah.
Do you suppose the ants can see the yeast with their naked eye?
I don't. That's a good question. Even though they're small, I don't think they're that small. You know, like like in terms of like being able to see the actual yeast. Yeah.
What's the scale? I guess.
Well, so I imagine that the resolution of an ant eye, so they have these multifaceted eyes, kind of like you see the cartoonish like spider eye, for example, where they have a bunch of little rods. And generally, those eyes are not as good at. They're actually not as good at like resolving images as ours are, but they're really good at detecting movement. And that's because like each little cell, if you have, it's like a pixel. So like if you have something that pixel and on something you don't, you know something's moved. So it's a much more like fine scale thing. So that it's better than our eyes at that, but it's not as good as our eyes at resolving things. So it's unlikely, I think, that they could see, because yeast is like much smaller than both humans and ants. So that's a good question though.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about the scale. Like, what is this like? What is like the general scale of like human to ant? It's
Right.
like, I don't know, 1 to like several 100,000 probably.
Yeah, it's probably like 1 to, if I think about, it's probably maybe like 1 to 1,000 or so. But then probably like ant to yeast, I would imagine would be like even smaller than that. Although I admit, despite the fact that I study biology, I sort of get confused sometimes about the scales of things. And then when I think about the universe, I just go crazy. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, because if these yeast is all over. It's all over our bodies.
Right.
It's obviously on ants.
Hopefully you've never accidentally thrown a few humans into the fermentation process. So.
There was a brewery though that did culture yeast off of the brewmaster's beard.
Oh, well, it seems like you'd be able to do that pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean it's not so outlandish though, because he's spending so much time in the brewery.
Oh, right, so it's picking up.
His microbiome is going to be predominantly brewer's yeast.
Huh. That's
His skin microbiome is going to be predominantly brewer's yeast because of the environment in which he works.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting.
Culture off of his beard. It's still a funny story though.
Yeah, like my advisor at the I'm at the University of Chicago and the Field Museum here in Chicago, and my advisor Corey Moreau actually does a lot of microbiome research with ants actually, and looking at like the gut, but it's more like the gut microbiome and stuff.
Of ants.
Yeah. Yeah, right, of ants. Yeah. So you can actually dissect like the gut is actually pretty easy. Although I'm not good at it, but for people who know how to do it, dissecting the gut out of the ant is actually pretty easy. So you can study it.
Yeah. Sure it is.
Yeah, there's probably
it's really hard.
Wait. Oh yeah, right. Because you have to do like under like the microscope and stuff. But
yeah. Wow. That requires some fine motor skills.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I was actually going to ask you like pretty much I guess we can finish up soon, but I was wondering like what's the weirdest thing that you ever used in beer, besides ants, I guess.
This is my house culture here.
Wait, what even is? Oh, is that? Wait, what is that? Just like a piece? That's a piece of wood, right?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm like,
oh no, I can see it. Yeah.
like all of your.
What even is that? I mean, like, where did it come from?
So. Good. It came from. Is it wet? It's wet. It came from the park near my Brooklyn apartment. So when I was getting into fermenting with wild yeast, I was reading. I don't even remember. I came across the article. It's out there. You just Google it. But about fermentation in olden times.
Oh, right.
They were the brewers. I mean, it was a more like making beer was more of a household function in antiquity. it
Right,
wasn't.
which is similar for a lot of things, I feel like.
They had breweries, but it was more of a thing that you did at home.
I see.
Like, make the bread and you'd make the beer.
Right.
Go hunting and stuff.
Yeah.
So families would have a special paddle, like a stirring paddle, and these were family heirlooms. They would be passed down from generation to generation because of their particular ability to make good beer. And the people thought that these paddles were magic.
Doing something special to make it into beer, basically.
People work with it, and then it would just ferment up. It would start bubbling, and they didn't know what yeast even was.
Right. Yeah.
So,
then of course bacteria or any sort of right, yeah.
They didn't know stuff was living in the paddle.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that's what was going on, though. Is the theory? Most likely is that there was yeast living on their magic paddle.
Yeah.
I guess after you begin to, what's the word? I guess favor, or you begin to control for, even on accident, yeast that brews that ferment sugar well.
I see.
The more you use it, the more you condition it to have that particular.
Oh, right. It's actually almost like an evolutionary process. Almost it's like you're selecting for that community. Yeah.
That's the word. Yeah, selecting. You begin selecting for brewer's yeast, more or less. So I found this log foraging for firewood. I was just trying to get some firewood. I thought it was nice looking, so I didn't burn it, and it sat in my yard for months, and I had planned to lacquer it or make some sort of a piece out of it.
Yeah.
Then I read about that whole magic paddle, and I was like, maybe my log is magic. So it's maybe it's between, depending on what ingredients you put, it's $20 to $30 to make a 5-gallon batch of beer.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll risk $25 to see whether there's good brewer's yeast on this log or not. So I made a 5-gallon batch, and I just submerged the log in the beer.
Yeah.
And it fermented right up, just like normal.
Wow. So was that your first time doing it, or it was after a bit when you had started doing something?
First time.
Oh wow! So even your first time was kind of almost like an accident. It was wow. That's pretty fun.
But now I've done it so many times that there's a really robust brewer's yeast culture on the log, so it makes really good beer. So
is that sort of when you kind of will use that every so often whenever you feel like it, whatever, to brew some more?
Yeah, I'm kind of experimenting with it right now. I decided this year I'm going to just make one recipe.
I see.
So just the same malt and the same hops in every single recipe, so I can control.
So that's why you won't that's why you don't want to play with the ants anymore.
I know, but the thing I'm going to change is the yeast.
Oh, I see.
So and things about the fermentation. So I see. So the grain and the hops will always be the same and subdued. I'm not trying to get a whole lot of flavor out of them because I want to see what the yeast is doing.
Yeah.
I'm controlling those variables so that the only variable I'm changing is what I'm doing with the yeast and the fermentation.
Cool.
So I might do 2-3 different batches with the log at 2 or 3 different temperatures to see.
Oh, neat. Right.
What kind of flavor profiles it does at 50 degrees, 60 degrees, 70 degrees.
Cool. Yeah.
And then also with different cultures. So I'll make a culture from ants and do that recipe with the ant culture, then I can compare and contrast with what the log is doing. And I've got a few strains banked at a place called Bootleg Biology. They're in Nashville, Tennessee. So if I get a good culture off of some ants this spring, then I'll send that one in as well.
Oh, cool! Yeah. If you do brew some ant beer again, I would definitely be willing to buy some. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then because there's a whole ant lab. I work in the ant lab in the Field Museum, and so we could do a whole lab tasting or something, and record it and send it to you or something.
Use you could kind of use the tequila tradition. Maybe I'll just put an ant in each bottle.
Oh, yeah. Or put an ant on the edge of the glass or something.
I mean, normal. I'd be worried. There are ants that sting. Like the cow killers. Is that a toxin?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually because in China I had like there's a liquor there you're probably familiar with like baijiu the white like liquor in China and so I once had basically like a moonshine of that which had I just tasted some of it because I was worried about this like when they had literally giant wasps. You may have seen the news on it, like they had the giant wasps in East Asia and South East Asia just giant wasps, like several of them inside the moonshine, and like the reason why I wanted to get a sip of it is because I wanted to say I tried it, but I also like it was kind of worried because it is some chemicals, and I suspect that like probably the chemicals are not a high enough dose, especially taking it through like orally as opposed to like injecting it in your blood or something. It's probably not toxic, but like I guess I'd be a little worried about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get. I mean. Isolating is one thing, wherein you like. I don't know if you in that Vice article. I
didn't read it too fully. I kind of I read some of it, but I haven't gotten to all of it yet.
I think her last name was Madden, and Madden. She isolated a strain of yeast from a wasp. Oh. But there's a pretty cool slide in that article about how she didn't just put the wasp in; she crushed it and then cultured it, and then did some isolation on dishes. So
it was almost like chemistry, basically, or like yeah.
Which is what I usually do.
Oh, cool.
But I didn't know what to answer.
Yeah, I was just sort of like, let's see what happens. So I guess that would be very doable. Yes. Well, so I guess as just like one final question, if they got like, what is something that you wish you knew about ants, but never knew who to ask?
Let's see. I already asked if they could see yeast.
That's true. Maybe that was kind of already the answer.
What is their? What's I guess. What? Let's see. What do they do during the winter?
What do they do? That's a good question. Yeah, so like they basically like hibernate, kind of like bears or whatever. Except as far as I know, they don't go into like a full on like hibernation state. But it's basically that. It's like a low energy sort of state where they're just kind of like like chilling out, kind of literally. Like in just sort of like like low activity and state essentially. So it's Yeah, I mean, I guess it's basically like hibernation, but and some that might vary because actually in like warmer environments too. Actually, like there isn't like a true winter, but there is kind of like peaks and like lower activity stages. But in cold areas it would be something like that. Yeah.
They're coming into the kitchen now, so I think they start to pick up.
Well, you're very lucky that you're blessed with ants in your house. So
right, I should just start collecting them.
Right, well, yeah, that's true. Like, yeah, it'd be easy to find some ants if they're coming to your house. You can just get the ants from your house, and then that would be.
You guys messed up.
Right.
Going to the beer now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for speaking with us, and I definitely hope that you end up experimenting with ants a bit, and I could more in the future, so I could taste some and I can share it with the ant lab.
Yeah, you would be the first one to get a bottle if I do
Cool. That's very good to hear. Yeah. Well, I guess good luck with experimenting in this coming year.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no problem.
Have a good one, dude.
Yes, yeah.